Welcome to the topic where we highlight Houston Community College, our students, our programs, and our reach into the community. I'm Todd Duplantis. I want to welcome our Facebook Live audience and those of you watching us on YouTube. Welcome to the live show. You can also catch us on cable on Houston Community College TV, better known as HCC TV. And you can find us across all social media platforms as Houston Community College District. Today's show, we're talking about emergency management. HCC is emerging from COVID, but entering the heart of hurricane season. Today, we're talking about how HCC navigates a world where the unexpected is just part of life. Dr. Kurt Ewen, HCC Vice Chancellor of Strategy Planning and Institutional Effectiveness, and also Chief of Staff, joins us to talk about the strategic side of emergency management. Dr. Ewen, good afternoon to you.
How are you, Todd? It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. I know emergency management is a wide scope. Can you plan for any type of emergency?
Can you?
Yes.
Well, I think you can be prepared for any kind of emergency by having good systems in order, right? And so one of the things that HCC decided to do a while back before I got here was to follow a practice that is established by FEMA, the National Incident Management System, that basically gives us a structure within which to operate so that when an emergency comes on, then we kick into that mode. The Chancellor releases the system into the emergency management system. We invoke the incident command team. And depending upon the emergency, I know we're going to get to that in a minute, depending upon the type of emergency, it may vary depending upon the reach and the scope of the team that's responding. I can tell you that during COVID, it was a very large team. So there is the incident commander, and there's two of us in this case, Bob McCracken and I co-lead that work. And so we've been at this since last a year ago, March. Actually, we had our first incident command team, I think, at the end of February in 2020. And then there is a public information officer, there's legal, there are representatives from student services, instruction. There's a leadership team, a command team at every campus, which depending upon the kind of incident we have becomes more important, right? So we know that depending upon the storm that hits, some colleges may get hit more directly than others, given the geographic distribution of HCC. But with COVID, we had a very large team and we met on a regular basis. We follow a certain protocol and it becomes basically a means of information sharing. We establish a communication plan or protocol from there so that the communications team can get the information out. And all of this is primarily focused on some rather large strategic issues, right? So we want to ensure the safety and health of all of our students and our staff. We want to minimize the risk and the damage to our facilities wherever possible, and to have our response ready to go when the emergency goes by so that we can move back in and deal with water, deal with all sorts of things.
You mentioned a number of emergencies we prepare for, but I imagine let's talk about the different emergencies. This can go everything, run the gamut from really hard freeze like we had in February to a hurricane, which we prepared for a couple of weeks ago with one that was heading out in the Gulf.
Right. I can tell you that since I've been at HCC, I've been involved in numerous teams related to hurricanes. We had the Winter Storm Uri come up this winter. We had an active shooter threat for our Central College once, and we had to shut down that location. We obviously, COVID has been its own deal. Sometimes work is happening behind the scenes, even when we're not aware of it. So there is a team that works in Bob's office that are constantly monitoring the weather patterns. During certain times of unrest, if there is concerns about potential for for injury to our faculty and staff, some of that may happen there. There could be any kind of thing that would require us to invoke this.
And I know, for example, you talk about getting people back on the campuses. You know, for the most part, for the last, 16 months, many of us have been out of the office because of the COVID situation. But Trump, I'm thinking of the Winter Storm Uri that happened. You still had to prepare the campuses because we did have some damage on the campuses. Did COVID make things, with having people off campuses, obviously, did it make things easier for preparing for these emergencies or more difficult from a strategic sense?
I think in terms of preparing the facilities, it certainly made life a little easier because we could get into spaces without really having to worry about students. We didn't have to worry about evacuation plans or getting people off the locations related to students or staff. And we could get in, given the depth of the freeze, you know, our buildings aren't necessarily designed for that. And there were, you know, we had some water damage. I will tell you that one of the areas that I didn't mention earlier, probably one of the biggest areas of concern currently in terms of incident response has to do with cybersecurity.
Yeah. And that
is a major deal right now. Yeah.
And that falls under your team as well?
Well, in terms of the general response. So I wouldn't consider myself an expert on COVID, although I'm more of an expert now than I was. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on hurricanes. My job is really to help facilitate the structure that we have. We have well-trained people who come to us as professionals in facilities and safety and risk management and legal. And our job is to give them a platform within which they can coordinate with each other and to make the best decisions possible.
COVID threw us all for a loop, but I imagine you have to prepare for these unforeseen emergencies with your team.
You do. I think one thing that COVID has really taught us is we had a meeting last week and the Chancellor spoke to this very directly. And that is that with COVID, let's take a hurricane. A hurricane, we have a forecast. We often see the hurricane coming 6, 7, 8 days in advance. It gives the news media plenty of time to give people all sorts of anxiety about it coming. And there is, we have a general sense as to when it's going to come in, when it's going to go out, and we're done. Harvey was a little different. It just kind of sat there. COVID, and a lot of times people thought, well, HCC is really indecisive. It's like, well, no, it's because we kept building plans that we would get halfway launched and we had to pull them back because COVID had shifted a bit. I can remember some of the things I said last March in a public meeting about what we could expect during the COVID thing. I was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Completely wrong, right? Had I been like Dr. Fauci, they would be running me through the mill, right? For changing my mind all the time. But we were just responding to the reality as it was coming at us.
It's something we all learn from. You know, we deal with tropical storms in Houston, hurricanes, all types of emergencies. We're going to take a short break on the topic. When we come back, we'll bring back Dr. Ewen. We're also going to talk with Bob McCracken with our Emergency Risk Management Department. We'll talk to him about how HCC deals with emergencies and what it looks like for our staff and for our students. All that and more when the topic returns.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But I get it, you're busy, and busy people can't have prediabetes. I read that wrong. They can, okay. Just go to the site.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
If a natural disaster shows up at your doorstep, you can't just turn it away. That's why it's important to prepare for emergencies before they show up. Go to ready.gov/plan to find the tools and tips you need. and make a plan today.
Welcome back to The Topic. I'm Todd Duplantis. We're talking about emergency management this afternoon on the show. Before we get to our guests, I want to remind you, if you're watching us on Facebook Live, welcome to the show. Also, our viewers out there on YouTube, you can find us across all social media platforms as Houston Community College District. And you can also download the audio versions of all of our shows at hccs.edu/podcast. If you are watching us on social media, make sure you tune into our cable channel, HCC TV, found across the district on the finer cable systems. Okay, we're talking about emergency management today. We've been talking with Dr. Kurt Ewen, HCC Vice Chancellor of Strategic Planning and Institutional Effectiveness. And we've also now are joined by Robert McCracken, Executive Director of Risk Management, who's going to talk to us about the tactics. Good afternoon to you both. Bob, I'm going to start with you. When we have an emergency, maybe you can tell us how the incident is handled by you, Dr. Ewen, and the rest of the team.
Good afternoon, Todd. Thank you. So, we do an all hazards approach to emergency planning, which, as you talked about in the previous segment, you never know exactly what the emergency is going to be. And so we try to set up a system that's in place so that regardless of what the emergency is, we have pieces in place to respond. Number one, remember, we have our own police department, right? So you can reach the police department from any phone on campus dialing 88888, or if you're off campus, 713-718-8888, or you can call 911. And so we always have the police department available to support whatever we're doing. But basically on every campus, we've done a lot of training with the campus managers and the college operations staff so that there are people on site who are familiar with our incident management processes that we use, so that when those incidents occur, they can notify, they notify my office, and we pull together kind of the central district team that may need to assist and manage. At the same time, they're reaching out, and we're coordinating with the communications department to send those emergency alert text messages, right? So if there's something we need you to do right away, the police department can get those text messages out to people so that they're aware and can take action. And then we're following up and doing all of those follow-ups, right? Posting things on our website, pushing messages out to the local news media, and doing our best to make sure people are aware. From the district level, the most important thing that we're doing is we're just aligning those resources to support whatever's happening at the campus. And so we try to kind of predict ahead of time what the next things are going to be that they need, so that the folks that are on the ground right where the emergency is happening can get the support that they need.
Bob, speaking of folks on the ground, is there information available on the campus to help guide faculty and staff through an emergency?
Absolutely. I don't know if you'll be able to see this.
It's disappearing a little bit, but yeah.
It's a red book that's hanging inside of every classroom across our district that says HCC, Houston Community College Emergency Response Guide. You can also get to that from hccs.edu. At the bottom of the page, there's a link that says in case of emergency. If you click on that, it is the electronic version of that emergency response guide. And it has very specific instructions for everything from evacuation to fire to a chemical spill, how to prepare for severe weather. It is very practical short-term actions. The idea of that emergency response guide is these are the things we want you to do in the first couple of minutes of an incident. Feel free to pick that up next time you're in a classroom, take a look at it. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer. But the number one thing that people need to make sure that they do is go into their student account or their employee account and make sure that they have a mobile phone number listed in the system, because that's how we're going to get a hold of you in case of an emergency where we need you to do something right away. So that's really important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's always important. Working in the communications office, we've always tried to get across to the faculty and staff. When you enter your information in the system, make sure your mobile phone is your primary number, because I know there's a group text that goes out for emergencies that's sent out, and you really need to know when these things are happening right away.
Right. And one of the upgrades that we made really right before COVID was we have the system now that we can push the message to all the phones that are displayed throughout the district. So at the same time we're putting out the message to people's text cell phones, we can put the message out to the office phones, et cetera, as well, the classroom phones, so that people are more likely to hear it.
Dr. Ewen, I want to bring you back into the conversation. I know this may seem like an obvious answer for people who are in the communications business or in education, but how important is it to have not only your incident commanders, but also the staff, the faculty, and the students aligned with this whole thing that's going on, especially when you have an emergency? You've got to have everybody on the same page at the same time to guide them through safely.
Well, yes, that's the goal, but you're describing a utopian vision there, Todd. HCC is a huge institution, right? We have 7 colleges, 6 of them physical institutions, that creates some challenges for us in terms of how we get our news out there. I don't know if you're anything like me. I'm bombarded with email. Right. And so wading through all of that and then prioritizing a message from me or from Bob or from other people in Bob's area about what we're doing on a particular incident can be really, it's the kind of thing is really difficult to do. We had that challenge a number of times and still have it with COVID, right? So what we have really tried to do from a strategy perspective is over the course of COVID, we have systematically expanded out the groupings of people who are included in the discussion. We've broadened all of that out so that we had an incident operations an operations meeting today at 1:00. There are 70 people who come to that meeting. No presidents are there, no vice chancellors other than myself. It's deans and directors and others from across the institution so that we can make sure that the message is getting out. And that is a real hard thing to do. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity basically to say that listen to what's there, read what's there. We're doing our best to make sure that people have the best information possible in terms of their health and safety.
Bob, we're going to take a break in a moment, but before we do, I want to ask you a question involving if an emergency happens on a campus while you're there, what are some of the do's and don'ts that you would tell people?
So the number one do is to take a deep breath and just pause for a moment, because one of the things that happens in an emergency is our mind starts to race. Our vision, we start to get tunnel vision and we don't think as clearly. And so, just kind of take a moment and pause, regroup, and then follow instructions, right? And so if the instructions are to evacuate, then evacuate. Don't try to gather all of your stuff. If you can grab your cell phone and go and get out of the space. And the general rule is you want to move away from the problem, right? And so, things you can do in advance to make that easier is every time you walk into a building, just think about where I'm at in the building. Where's the nearest exit? Where's the exit that's the one that I didn't come in at, right? So if I know 2 ways out of the building, out of the room that I'm in, that's always helpful. Where's the phone if I need to call the police? Where's the pull alarm for the emergency alert? Pay attention to those things. And then remember that, in an emergency, there's a saying, look up. If you're in the hallway and you're not sure where to go, look up. There's exit signs that point the way to leave. But we have a tendency to kind of look down. So when in doubt, look up, and oftentimes you'll see the arrow pointing to the safety. So those are some of the basic ones. Obviously there's a lot of things you can do. The more you know about CPR, first aid, and keeping an emergency phone list, and putting your contact information in your phone, and all of those kinds of things. Carrying an identification, right? So carrying your ID, all of those things help. And maybe the most important thing is just be aware all the time. A lot of times we have our headphones on, we have earbuds in, and we're not paying attention. Just try to pay attention to what's going on around you. Know who's with you so that if you have to evacuate a building, I know that Dr. Ewen was right next to me, and so he's still right next to me, so I know he's where he's at. And so we're not sending, emergency response folks back into a building to find people who are already outside. So, just be aware of your surroundings and know two ways out is probably the biggest idea.
Todd, can I throw something in here too?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that people complain about all the time are these required trainings that faculty and staff are asked to do throughout the year. Those are really important when we have tragedies, when we have emergencies that we have to respond to. It could be a fire, it could be a shooter, it could be whatever. Those trainings are intended to help us all be prepared. So I'm just going to put that out there as a plug. They're not intended as opportunities to suck away your time, right?
They're not busy work. They're actually.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, gentlemen, stick around. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the emergencies happened. We're about to return back to campuses. How does HCC recover after the emergency has passed? That's coming up when the topic returns.
The faculty at HCC represents the best of the city. They're committed to getting our students to their goals.
A 4-year degree.
Workforce training. A better life.
HCC, for everyone, anytime, anyway.
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
That one day at PE when they were like yelling at me and then you just linked arms with me. I don't think you know how much like that helped me. I finally like knew that I had somebody.
Welcome back to the topic. I'm Todd Duplantis. If you're watching us on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, we appreciate you being here. Follow us across all social media as Houston Community College District. We've been talking about emergency management with Dr. Kurt Ewen, HCC Vice Chancellor of Strategic Planning and Institutional Effectiveness, and Robert McCracken, Executive Director of Risk Management. Bob, want to get back to you with some questions here. The emergency's over. We're going to return. I want to hear about that. But first, maybe you can explain the difference between risk management and how it's distinctively different from emergency management, or is it one and the same?
No, they're definitely different. They're related and they're connected, but emergency management is really about that immediate response, and it's really geared around protecting lives, right? And so we're trying to make sure that people are safe, that we minimize the number and severity of injuries, and that we keep the incident from getting worse. And those tend to be the primary goals of emergency management. Risk management is a little bit longer term, a little bit broader. So those things that we can do ahead of time to protect the buildings, whether that be fire alarms, sprinkler systems, regular practicing of drills, is certainly part of emergency management. But when you talk about the risk management piece is, okay, what happens if that building burns down? Are we adequately insured? Do we have coverage for it? Do we know what's in the building? We just had a lot of pipes freeze and chiller units go down during the winter freeze. Can we get out there quickly and get pictures taken of the damages so that when we're talking to the insurance companies or trying to get reimbursement through FEMA, that we have the evidence we need to say, we really had this item, it really was damaged. And this is how much it costs us to repair it, so that long term we can recoup those monies, so that the college doesn't have this long term financial hit from the emergency that happened. And then emergency or risk management also goes into some areas that are seemingly unrelated to emergencies, but they're really designed to prevent the emergency from happening, right? So we're reviewing kind of safe practices in the workplace, making sure that, our workers' compensation insurance program is in place so that if people slip and fall and get injured, that they have the ability to get well, making sure that we're doing kind of restrictions from work so that people aren't working while injured, or just preparing for pandemics. So we do, we've been working, Gwen Drumgold, our risk manager, has been working with the Department of Health for the city of Houston and Harris County for many, many years. And we work with them regularly, which has been really helpful. When the pandemic came, we kind of had those existing relationships with a lot of the people.
When the emergency is passed, I think of the Harvey situation where the city flooded. I think of obviously the winter storm Uri, where the buildings, weren't, you couldn't enter them because of the freeze and the roads were all frozen over. You obviously have to take in consideration not just people returning back to campuses, but their own safety and really how they're doing at their house. Because during Harvey, many of us were flooded, and during the winter storm, many of us were without electricity for a while. I guess each one of these is unique in getting the staff back on the campuses or to work.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that Houston Community College has done a wonderful job of, frankly, is recognizing the fact that even though our building might be ready for people to come back into it, the people might not be ready to come back into it. We saw after Hurricane Harvey where we gave the additional leave to people who had to take care of insurance claims and all of those kinds of things. After Uri, where we had the issue where people didn't have power, right? They had lost power for multiple days. They had damages to their homes. Our students had damages to their homes. You had disruption in work schedules for students. And so I think we've really tried over the last several years to make a concerted effort to take all of those human factors into consideration. So it's not just about getting a building ready. It's about making sure that the people are able to come into that building and be effective while they're there.
We've got about a minute left. Dr. Ewen, I'm going to ask you real quickly if you could think of one major thing you learned during this pandemic of COVID, what would be the takeaway you have over the last 16 months?
Well, it's been a very interesting study in people, I would say, is that it's been amazing to me the ways in which people have been able to cope and to respond as leaders, as whatever, to the environment that they find themselves in, and it's been remarkable.
Bob, real quickly, what did you take away from the whole last 16 months?
Wow, you just never know what's coming next. I think for me, the biggest thing is to remember that we're all in a different place at different times. And so as we were working through it, there were some times where I was like ready to take the next steps and other people weren't. And then there were other times other folks were kind of more prepared for it. And that emotional kind of community relationship stuff is really important. I think that was the piece that was really hard to learn to connect with this remote learning and remote meetings and not seeing people in person. I think over time kind of wore us all down a little bit.
Well, what's the next emergency? We'll have to wait and see. One thing for sure, Houston Community College will be prepared for it. We're going to wrap up this edition of The Topic. Thanks for joining us, Facebook Live and YouTube. We'll see you next week right here on The Topic.